going to be telling us a bit about bikemaps.org. So yeah, without further ado, please welcome Dr.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, and it's wonderful to see so many people here today on kind of a funny week with the holiday right in the middle and a lovely Friday, so I'm grateful to see so many of you. So I'm going to talk to you today a bit about bikemaps.org. So I am a professor in geography at the University of Victoria, and I run the SPAR lab there. And SPAR lab primarily has built its reputation doing spatial ecology, so lots of forestry, mountain pine beetle infestations, biodiversity type research questions. But in my personal life, I really love to cycle. And how many of you have heard of Rinkwatch? So Rinkwatch is out of Laurier. Colin Robertson used to work in the SPAR lab, and he left there, and shortly after he started working on Rinkwatch. And I was super annoyed because he was getting famous, and he couldn't have had this idea when he was out in Victoria. No. So I was riding my bike around and thinking, you know, this BGI thing seems to really have some legs, and it seems like there are opportunities to really engage citizens in the types of things that are of interest to us. And so I was riding my bike, and I thought, I know what we'll do. We'll have a website where people can rant and rave about things that happen to them when they're on their bikes. So initially, I was going to call it Flip the Bird. And it was going to be where people could go on and say, hey, you almost cut me off. But I'm a researcher, and so I started where all of us start, and I hit the literature to kind of look and get a sense for what was out there and what we needed. And I very quickly realized that there isn't actually any good data available for planning in regards to cycling safety. So I got on the phone with an amazing researcher named Kate Heschke from UBC, who does lots of cycling and city studies. And she said, hey, no, you cannot joke around about this. This is serious business. Most places have very little data available on cycling safety. So it's estimated that 30 to 40% of cycling incidents are captured in any kind of data set. And the way that they came to this number was Kay had done a research project where they had interviewed people coming into the ER that had some kind of cycling related incident, and then they had a sense of how many of those were reported to police data or insurance claims are really the #1 data source that we have on cycling incidents. And so they saw that most cycling incidents weren't captured anywhere. And so there's no centralized reporting. In British Columbia, we have one main insurance agency, ICBC. And so you'll see me talk about that a few times. So we're kind of lucky because with one insurance agency, there's sort of one repository for all of the insurance claims that involve bikes, and we can access those data. But in a place like here in Ontario, you have so many insurance companies that even getting that 30% of data would be very difficult. And there's also nowhere that anyone reports near misses. And if you think about it from a sort of public safety or health surveillance standpoint, a crash is actually a relatively rare event. You have lots of near misses when you're out there on your bike, but luckily, we don't have too many crashes. So near miss data can be really important to help us be more proactive about planning. But also from a statistical standpoint, it gives you a lot more N to work with if you can start to have near-miss data incorporated. So we came up with the idea of making a website called bikemaps.org where people can map cycling crashes, near misses, and hazards that they see out there on the road. And they can also report thefts. And so thefts was just kind of, we haven't really promoted it as a theft mapping tool, but the technology saved that as well. So this is what it looks like, and actually, because I'm hooked up to the internet, I'm just going to go and show you a little bit, I think. Maybe I won't do that quite yet. So this is what it looks like. It feels like you're on Google Maps, but it's OpenStreetLayers that you're on. You can see that we launched it on October 6th, which was Bike to Work Day in Victoria. And very quickly, just through social media, mostly we had it picked up around the world. So here you can see that my social outreach is not doing well in Africa, but in a lot of other countries, we have had some visits to the website. I think before lunch today, we had 1,229, I think, reports to the website. This is Victoria, where we've really focused our promotion. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but we've had 540 reports to Victoria since we launched. And you can see all kinds of things are being reported. These little markers, which the geographers of the border students very cleverly incorporated into the bike wheels of the project talk announcement, are a nice way of characterizing proportion of incidents that are reported. The red is crashes, the yellow are near misses, the green are hazards, and the gray are thefts. And since we started publicizing this talk, a bunch of reports have shown up in the UW region, so that's cool. I think about 10 here and 6 in Guelph. So we can go and look at what those show us. When you go onto the website, if you want to report an incident, you use this marker here, and you just drop it down and it gives you a table. And the table is really important because this is where the research component really comes in. We have about 20 questions on here that we ask people about their crashes and near misses, and these were designed with the input from a number of different cycling research groups about what are the variables that we need to do spatial modeling of infrastructure that relates to different kinds of injury, and it will help us characterize safety and risk. So if we just look at the website, when you log in, it will automatically locate where you are. Here we can zoom out so we can go look at some of the, here is the hotspot. This is the hotspot for Waterloo with all of our 10 incidents. And if we click on it, then we can start to see what's happened at this location. And I thought this was interesting because in both cases, when I looked at what was reported here, so this one says they were crossing the intersection after exiting the bike path, and they're talking a bit about how, in both cases here, about how the bike path and the road network integrate.
You need to focus that better. You can't read it.
Pardon me?
You can't read that.
Oh, okay. It might be, I made my text smaller so that you could see my visualizations. Maybe we can zoom in a bit. Is that better?
Yeah.
In both cases, the people contributing the information here talk about how the pathway and the road network intersect. This is a huge thing that we've seen in the early data from the bikemaps.org project is nowhere has there ever been data on regional trails because those are not going to result in insurance claims with vehicles. And so we're seeing in Victoria and in Vancouver and in other places a lot of data being reported along regional trails where we have no cars, and it seems to be where the regional pathways intersect the road network, that if that's not designed well, there's a lot of issues at those locations. So it's going to be something that we study a bit more. So there's a few features on the website that I think people aren't using a ton. This is one of my favorites. So Taylor DeNewton will show you as part of our team at the end here. He created, as part of a directed studies for me, this beautiful visualization using D3. So here I've zoomed it in around Victoria, and it's this interactive way you can query the data. So I can look at just, say, the collisions and near misses, because from a safety standpoint, that's what I'm most interested in. Along here, we can see what's happening throughout the days of the week. So we always see this weird peak on Wednesdays in our data. There's always more crashes and near misses on Wednesdays. We're often interested in traffic safety research on just the days of the week, so we can query that as well. And then we can see that these are hours of the day that will change. So we see morning peaks and afternoon peaks, which I'll talk about in a bit. And if you wanted to even zoom in and change your spatial extent, you can do that, and as you do, everything is dynamic and changes. So I found this really helpful in just exploring the data, and it's on there, and you can look at whatever region you're interested in. Another interesting feature is to add data. Well, so I'm a very impatient internet user. My husband calls me a clickatron. I'm just in there clicking away. And so I didn't want any barriers to people contributing data. So you don't have to give me any information. But if you want to create a login, then you have the opportunity to use this marker tool to mark out an area of interest to you. So if you're a planner, you might put it around all of the city that you're planning for. If you are an individual cyclist, you might put it around your commuting route. And once you have that, then every time you log in, this little bell will show, and you'll be able to see what's been reported in the last week in your area. So I can track continually what other people are providing to me as well. So those are two things that are on there to help keep users engaged primarily. We just launched a Android app, and so the Android app has a little alert, which is basically this alarm bell, which it'll look like Facebook, so you'll get a certain number of marks to let you know that people have been reporting in your area. The iOS version of the app, it's been submitted to the Apple Store, so we're just waiting for that to be approved. Yeah, so we have a number of plans for the technology. The apps were a big deal because our users told us pretty quickly, especially in some of the bigger centers like Vancouver, that if we wanted them to support us, they wanted apps. So we've been working on getting that developed. One of the things that we don't have any data on right now is where people ride. So you can imagine if we want to start analyzing where the crashes are occurring or what's safer and what's riskier, we need exposure data. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways we're getting around that. But eventually we'd really like to have on your phone a route tracker. It's just that we want to actually be able to just detect when you start riding. You want to just put it in your bike leg and detect. Because even someone like me who loves data and is committed to safe cycling, when I'm trying to get out the door with my 2 kids, I'm not going to remember to turn it on. So it's something that we need to overcome. One of the interesting things so far with this project has been the hazard mapping. So we thought, okay, we really want the data on crashes and near misses so we can analyze that. But the technology for mapping hazards is similar. You just need a point. You can use some different attributes. We'll add that in. It turns out hazard mapping is a nightmare because there's a lot of different kinds of hazards. So you can have a weather hazard, which should show up on your map and then disappear once the black ice is gone. Or you could have a hazard that is leaves on the road that someone goes up and cleans, and then that needs to be removed. Or you could have a traffic flow hazard where you nearly get nailed every time you're out on your bike, and that doesn't get removed until it gets fixed. So we have all these different kinds of hazards, and even the city of Victoria, for instance, is super interested in being able to respond to the hazards people map, but they want a way to mark that they fix them. So it's not good if these just accumulate on the map. And so over the summer, one of our jobs is to improve how we're doing hazard mapping, and we thought about just getting rid of it altogether. But I think that there's a lot of, it's important to give our users a public service, and the hazard mapping is a little bit about giving something back, I think. And then we've had a lot of interest in the website from Europe, and so people have volunteered to translate the technology for us. So we're currently having it translated into Dutch, French, German, Spanish, and Finnish. Someone recently offered Chinese, so we'll see if that comes together. But yeah, the technology will be able to pick up where you are and then know what language to show you basically when you arrive to the website or use the app. So we can talk more. There'll be lots of time for questions about that. One of the interesting things about this project for us is that typically I study things like mountain pine beetle and grizzly bears. And I don't want to talk to the grizzly bears, so that's okay. I just sit in my office and work on my data. But in this case, we really needed to let people know that we were here, that we wanted them to map. And so there's been a huge outreach component to this project, which was new for us. We put out several media releases. We mined the data for interesting things and put them out on our blog and let people know that we're there. We've done a lot of interviews. We've had several TV crews through the lab, which is super annoying to all the students that are working on bike maps. But one of the funnest things that we did was we got 500 of these water bottles. We put little notes inside them that said, tag, you've been selected to improve cycling safety. And then one morning we went out and put them on bikes all over town so that when people returned to their bikes, they would find these water bottles with notes. And it actually drove a lot of traffic to the website and increased the data that we had. I think we got about 50 new sites mapped in Victoria in about 24 hours. And this is us. This is my child carrier. We just filled it up with water bottles and rode around. So it was a pretty fun way to spend the morning. But these kind of projects, they require good technology, nice visualizations, and things that are easy to use. But they also require a lot of energy and commitment to keep reminding people that you're there. So even once people have mapped, we don't want them to never think of us again. We want to stay on their radar. So what do we have in the data so far? So we have just over 1,200 locations that have been mapped worldwide. So this is in 19 countries, so mostly in Canada and the US, but Australia also has over 30 locations mapped. Actually, just in like a 48-hour period, Calgary mapped 50 locations all at once when somebody picked it up on social media. Lots of interest from some colleagues in Germany. And I'm surprised that places like Germany and Holland are showing so much interest, because we perceive cycling as so safe there. Why would they need a tool like this when they already have bucket loads of bike lanes and things are pretty safe? But I'm actually getting emails on a regular basis from city planners that say, hey, we don't have access to this data, even in Holland. So I think that's really interesting, and it also shows that cycling's safe there because they're super committed to safe cycling there. So in Victoria, I think it's kind of interesting to look at because we've done so much outreach there. The ICBC, so that's our insurance company, they put out cycling data, and if you look for what they have in and around the CRD, so this is sort of Victoria and surrounding area, they have between 119 and 140 locations mapped each year. So we launched this on October 6th, so in less than a year, we already have 540 reports that relate to cycling safety. So that kind of shows that these sort of projects quite quickly can really increase the amount of data and information that's available to us when we need to make decisions. So about 65% of the data are the crashes and near misses, so luckily most of the data is in near miss, and I'm happy about this because I sit around at night looking to see who's added data, and I feel really guilty that I'm so delighted when new data is added because these are not positive events. So we prefer to have the near miss data. So lots of near miss and then some crashing, and then 27% is hazards and 7% is thefts. And like I said, we haven't really built this as a theft reporting tool. I think there's actually a lot of things out there for getting your bike back. People love to use Twitter to just share that this is a picture of my bike, it's been swiped. In Vancouver, actually, there's a very popular site for mapping your bike theft, so I think there's maybe also a bit more competition out there in terms of social media tools to use to report that. So when we start to look at the quality of the data citizens are providing, I'm pleased to see that it is, it seems to be good quality data. So we don't actually have anything that tracks, it has to be anonymous. So we don't have anything that tracks where the data comes from, except that my OCD tracks it on a regular basis. But we curate the data super closely to make sure that there's nothing nefarious going on. So far we haven't seen anything weird. We thought, you know, there's the possibility to use this to pick a bone. Basically, you want a bike lane in front of your house, so you're just going to map 10 crashes that happened there. But we haven't seen anything like a spike of data in a strange location. We haven't seen people using it the way I initially imagined it, with the flip the bird kind of idea. We haven't seen people tearing a strip off each other. We once had a license plate reported in the comments that we deleted because we have to keep things anonymous. But for the most part, people seem to be using it for the purpose it was intended. One of the interesting things is that I didn't realize in the planning community how much they differentiated between recreational riders and commuters. So they're really interested in knowing about commuters and people who are not driving their car. Because the goal in a lot of cities is to increase the mode share of the bicycle. And so 85% of the people that report are reporting that they had an incident or saw a hazard while commuting or on some kind of purpose-specific trip like an errand. From a health perspective, I think this is interesting because if a wreck rider gets hit by a car or has some kind of incident, the cost of the healthcare system is the same or similar if it is a recreational rider or if it was someone who was trying to get to work. But when I talked to the City of Victoria about that, I was thinking an interesting thing to do would be to take the bike maps data, look at what kind of injuries people are reporting, look at what the typical healthcare cost of that kind of injury is, and make a map that shows the cost of injury. And then it would make infrastructure look like a good deal. And they said, the city of Victoria said, well, you could do that, but we don't really care because we're not in charge of the healthcare dollars. So they're in charge of the transportation dollars. So it really showed that there's really two different perspectives, I think, that you can take on a project like bike maps. On the one hand, was actually one of the reasons, I think it's a pro and a con. It's a pro for getting funding, because I can apply for transportation money or for health money, but it's a con that these two groups aren't really talking to each other. Some other things we noticed in the data is that 76% of the incidents are recent. So you can report something up to 10 years old in the data, but mostly people are reporting current events. 60% of the data has only one or no attributes missing, and you only have to give me 4 things because, like I said, I'm not patient, so I anticipated other people might not be patient either. So you have to say, well, where obviously it occurred, when it occurred, if you saw a doctor, went to the hospital, and what type of road you were on, or what type of incident it was. But the rest of the information is, you don't have to give it to us, but most people are. And we've actually seen it over time as people have learned about the project and seen some of our preliminary results. They report more, they complete more of the data than they used to. The data that they don't want to give us is personal information, things like gender. So we ask them if they're male or female, we ask them how often they ride, we ask them if they were intoxicated. Only one person has said yes, that they were. But they don't perceive the need to give us this data. And my husband, whenever I start to look, kind of low, he goes on bike maps and maps with something on there. And it turns out he is one of the people who won't give me his gender information. And I asked him why, and he said, well, why would you need to know that? We're talking about cycling crashes. This is not important. And if you look at the literature, gender is a huge determinant of how safe your riding experience is, as is age. And so when we ask people for these things, and we do a citizen science project, we need to be telling them why we need this information. So for us, it's a bit of a task to communicate this better. I think it's easy to have something on the form that they fill out that's a little question mark that says, why do I need to know? And I can quote one of Kate Teschke's studies that shows that men are much more likely to get into a crash than women. So here's some other early data. So I already showed you that Wednesdays are a problem for us. So we see this is the data just for Victoria. So you need a critical amount of data in any one location, I think, to start to look at trends in time. So we're just focusing on Victoria. And so this is the days of the week where the red is the crash and the yellow is the near misses. And so at first we thought, okay, Wednesdays are weird because there's lots of riders. And so we went and got, luckily, Victoria just purchased a rider counter, which you can see up here. So they put it along our regional trail and it logs every 15 minutes the total number of riders. And so I was able to pull out by day of the week how many people are riding. And so we see that they're not riding more on Wednesdays. In fact, they're riding more on Tuesdays, perhaps. And Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays tend to be kind of similar. And that's kind of what you see in most of the traffic and transportation kind of research, is that midweek is quite similar. So we thought, okay, well, why else would we be having a peak on Wednesday? Thought, well, maybe it's because you can report an incident that occurred a while ago. And I know for myself, if I had a near miss on my bike, I could quite accurately pinpoint the time of day that occurred, but I might not remember the exact day of the week it occurred. So these Julian days up here, we looked at what was the Julian day difference between when the incident occurred and when it was reported. And we see that if there's a big delay in reporting, these are Saturday incidents, not Wednesday. And in fact, Thursday even has a bigger delay than Wednesday, so it wasn't that. So then I went and I got the ICBC data, and they don't like to give it out in a very detailed format, so anyone can get ICBC data that shows where the incident occurred and the month and year it occurred. But trying to get data of week was a little harder, but they did give it to me, and we saw that there is also in the ICBC data a slight peak on Wednesdays in terms of crashes that occur between cars and bikes. So we still don't really know why. We don't know what's going on Wednesdays. I haven't quit riding on Wednesdays yet. I still ride on Wednesdays. But we have a little bit more to look at. The next thing that we're going to look at is whether or not in Victoria there's more cars out on Wednesdays. And so we think that there might be slightly more cars out on Wednesdays, but yeah, we're still not really sure. So, and it'll come up again actually. This is crashes and near misses by over a 24-hour period. So this is just for weekdays. So we're filtered out the weekends. We're just looking at Monday to Friday. And the results are not super surprising, that you see these spikes at high traffic times of day. So this is your morning commute between 8 and 9, and then this is between 4 and 6 in the evening. One of the things, though, that is interesting is that the gray line over top is that rider volume, so how many bikes are out on the roads, and you see that even though this morning peak is the highest, that the rider volume it's not as quite as high during this time. So we're kind of curious about that. One of the reasons it might be is that the rider data, as a spatial scientist, the rider data is terrible. It has this beautiful spatial or temporal logging every 15 minutes, but it's one location for the whole city. We know that's not a good representation of cycling, especially because it's on a regional trail. So people use the regional trail a lot to commute, but they also rec ride on it. So you're probably getting more rec riders in the afternoon than, well, actually in Victoria they're pretty committed. You see a lot of rec riders out there at 6 in the morning, but they're usually taking over the road in a pack. So I think that there might be a bit of a rec rider bias here. But I looked at the ICBC data again to see if I could find a similar trend, and they won't give it to me hour by hour, but the summary that they gave me, well, actually they did give it to me hour by hour, but I got it late last week, so that's exciting that we finally have it. But what they had published are these 3-hour intervals. And this is a classic kind of resolution issue. So if you look at every 3-hour interval, so they had 6 to 9 essentially together, and the insurance data shows that if you look at things from 6 to 9 and then from 5 to 8, that it's not that morning peak that's high, it's the afternoon peak. But if you look at the bike maps data at the same resolution, it's not as marked, the trends are different, but it still makes that afternoon peak look different. So it shows that when we're not surprised by this when we do a lot of data analysis, but if we're aggregating the data by time, we're seeing a very different pattern in the data than if we have that 1-hour data. So I think it's another example of why having both the near-miss information in there, as well as the higher resolution that we can get from the citizens is quite important. Another interesting thing to note, and we'll come back to it, is that if you look at the near misses, they're higher in the morning, but the crashes are actually the same. So you have 15, it actually works, though it's proportional along the Y. Here, I actually know this is 15 crashes that occurred here, and this is 16 and 15 here. So the actual number of crashes that occur are similar, but the number of near misses is quite a bit higher in the morning, This figure is so exciting to me. This is the first time anyone's ever been able to have the data to make a figure like this, which shows injury, or a surrogate for injury, by hour. So here we see blue, if this is both a near miss or a crash that did not require any kind of treatment, there was no injury reported. The green are where you had to go and see a doctor, and the red are where you had to either go to the hospital or stay overnight in the hospital. So a surrogate, not a perfect mapping of injury for sure, but it does show that there are trends through time, and in this morning peak, even though the number of incidents, number of actual crashes between the morning and afternoon are quite similar, there's a lot more near misses in the morning. But there's also a lot more of the crashes, or more of the crashes. I'm obviously excited by any trend I see, because I keep seeing a lot, but it's maybe not a lot. More of the crashes required hospital visits. So I think this brings an interesting hypothesis that we will look at and try and test more, is when you have a similar number of crashes, but one is associated with a higher number of near misses, are the injuries associated with that time period worse? So that's something I think that we'll be able to explore a bit more as we go forward with this research. And then this is the last one I'll show you today. This is the same 24 hours, but in this case we looked at what kind of infrastructure was associated with the incident. Now in Victoria, our bike infrastructure is pretty thumbs down. There was actually just CTV just did a little news piece on Victoria and they gave us an F for cycling infrastructure because we have some bike lanes but none that are separated. So if you want to have proper cycling infrastructure, you actually need to separate the cars and the bikes. If you just paint a line on the road, it's not sufficient for actually changing ridership or really changing safety. So if you have a separated bike lane, you have 1/9 the chance of, or 1/9 the risk as if you had no infrastructure at all. So Victoria, our infrastructure story is a bit boring because we have busy streets, wide streets, and some streets with a painted bike line, but nothing more than that. But what this shows is that in the morning, it's those busy streets with no bike facilities that seem to be causing problems, that the quiet streets during these peak periods don't change that much in terms of what's going on them. This is kind of interesting that in the afternoon, we see more crashing going on where we have bike facilities. And I wonder if it's because this is, again, that regional trail that might have more cycling on it in the afternoon. So that's something for us to look at. Okay, so that's kind of some early reports from the data that we're seeing so far. But I want to tell you about a related thing that we're working on, which is truly trying to help us better analyze the bike maps data. So I mentioned that when we do cycling crash research, we need denominator data. We need to differentiate between 10 cyclists that had an incident and there were only 10 cyclists there versus 10 cyclists and there were 100 cyclists there. So we have to differentiate that. And there's really no good data on riding volume. So for Victoria and the surrounding area, the CRD, they run a volunteer bike count program where 4 times a year, they send people out to intersections to actually count who rides through and whether or not they're male or female, and they'll count which way they're going. So if you take all the years and all the months of data, these are the locations that we have. And every year I teach spatial stats, and some group brings me these data, and they're a nightmare because the spatial coverage is quite bad, and if you look at one time period, it's pretty sparse data. Does anyone ever use Strava? Yes, so Strava is an app that you can, so often it's used as an app you download onto your phone. It's typically used by recreational riders. You can track your speed, you can track how far you went, you can compete with your friends to see who rode farther or faster, kind of like a Fitbit, but for your bike. And Strava data has this spatial coverage that makes me feel so happy. It's everywhere. But the attribute information associated with that is pretty poor. So we know that Strava riders are only rec riders. So right away, the transportation folks that I've talked to, thumbs down on the Strava data. And it's obviously a biased undersampling of who's out there riding. So, but I couldn't help like it because it had such good spatial coverage. And one of the things that you'll see on our website is we have just a cartographic layer, which actually Taylor, the web developer, found last summer, and it just sort of shows like a heat map of all the Strava riders. So Strava's just kind of aggregated all their data, and they put out basically a JPEG that we put on our map, and it's the thing people dislike the most about our website. So we've had a lot of controversy on our website about where'd you get that Strava data? Strava data is terrible, you shouldn't use Strava data. Okay, but we just put it on there so that when people arrive to the website, they have something to look at initially. Otherwise, it was just blank. And so I phoned Strava at some point and said, hey, Strava, can we have your data to look at for Victoria? So we want to see if there's anything we can mine out of it that would be useful to understand where people are riding. And they said, you sure can. We have a new business model, and we'll sell it to you for $12,000 for 1 year for Victoria. And I said, no thanks. And so off I went, and I kept giving talks on bike maps, and people kept saying, what's going on? That's terrible Strava data. So I phoned them back and said, hey, how's your sales going? And they said, yeah, not so well. That's because nobody likes your data, because they all say the same thing. They say it's biased towards recreational riders, it's not useful for planning. And so they said, okay, we'll give you the data for Victoria. I said, okay, and if there's anything good in there, I'll tell you, and then you can use this to sell your data. So we have the CRD data, which is super accurate in terms of the attribute counts, but the spatial coverage is terrible. We have the Strava data, which has nice spatial coverage, but terrible attributes. So can we model anything out of these things that are interesting? So the first thing that we did was just to look at the data and get a sense of it. We just wanted to see how well these things correlated. And in part because the Strava guy said, hey, when we get into high density areas, high density in terms of roads, the Strava becomes a very good proxy for where everybody goes. The recreational riders are choosing the same routes in the cities. So we think that if you look in the cities, it'll look quite good. So you can see, if you know Victoria at all, this is kind of the airport and ferries are up here. And this is the main downtown. And you do see that in downtown Victoria, there is a pretty good correlation between the Strava riders and the CRD riders in terms of rider volume. So we looked at the trend at different times. We looked at it hourly. So if we wanted to show ridership at every hour of the day, how well could we correlate these two data sets? And maybe it's because I often work with grizzly bears and they don't behave in any kind of pattern. And if we have a correlation of 0.2, we are so cheerful that these correlations seem quite good to us. So we look at it hourly, we see a 0.5. If we look just in those morning and afternoon peak periods when you have lots of traffic, we see a 0.66, and then as we aggregate up to coarser resolutions, we see higher correlations. And then we also looked by months. So these are the 4 time periods at which the CRD runs this volunteer count program. So we see in January, May, July, and October, different strengths in terms of the correlation, and I was a bit disappointed in these results because I thought that we would see the highest correlations in July because you see lots of riders out there. But it turns out that a lot of people are on holidays in July, so you actually see the highest number of riders in the CRD data in May. So we see when there's lots of riders, those correlations get a little bit better. So these are this is a preliminary map. So Ben Jestico is the master's student who's working on this. And so he's basically trying to model for that downtown Victoria core where we see some of those correlations are good, whether or not you have a low, medium, or high number of riders in different time periods. And so he has found that using slope, whether or not there is a bike facility there, even if it is not separated, the speed limit, and whether or not it's a truck route. And so we actually see that there's more bikes on truck routes. So we're not really sure what's going on with that. So I haven't put the details in here because I think this is more a roadmap to where we're going than where we haven't actually arrived. And also the month. If you put those things in, then you can model the undersampling of the Strava data. So we're hoping to basically have maps like we see here. We have 3 categories-ish of ridership, and we can show you which roads you have lots of riders and which you have relatively few. And we'll be able to use that to inform some of the analysis that we do on where we have lots of crashing or near misses. And also the City of Victoria is going to be delighted to have these kind of data, and especially to see if we can use the Strava to monitor any kind of change over time. Because lots of cities have active transportation plans now. Many are either they just released them or they seem to be under development. And in Victoria, they're trying to increase the mode share of cycling from a low, which has been a low for a long time of about 4%, to 25% by 2038. So they have these big targets, but they have no way of monitoring that change. So this could be one approach that could help inform some of them. So we have lots of plans for analysis. Really what I've shown you today is we've built this system for getting better data on cycling safety. We've done a lot of outreach, which we continue to do, and I even brought you some stickers today, so you can help me with my outreach to try and get people adding data. And we've done some preliminary looks, which give us some confidence that there are some quality data coming in, but obviously our goal is to use these for doing research down the line. So the first study that we're doing is, once we have completed our Strava analysis, we're going to be doing a study of the main regional trail in Victoria. So we see a lot of people reporting along intersections where the trail meets the road network, and so we want to go and look at what are the most problematic, what are the sight lines, what are the vehicle volumes, bike volumes at some of those locations, and just then modeling around that. I'm really interested, I've really started out just wanting some data so I could map some hotspots and look at how these things change over time. And so I think we'll continue to do that. Whenever we put out, for Bike to Work Week this year, we put out the 8 worst intersections in Victoria, and we did it using basically the bike maps data and some kernel density estimation, and so we could identify some of the problem spots. So we'll continue to do that type of analysis. I think there's lots of interesting questions to compare the traditional data like the ICBC data or police reports with this kind of citizen-generated data, and to try and query what are the different information contents, the different patterns that come out when we look at these different kinds of data. Oddly, or serendipitously, the City of Victoria got a new mayor who likes biking. And so they just announced $7.8 million in bike infrastructure over the next 5 years. So this will be the first time that there'll be before data and then after data to look at what happens to ridership and also to safety when you change the cycling infrastructure. So to my shock, no one has ever done a study where they looked at how safe a road was before a bike lane went in and then looked at it after. They usually do some kind of comparison. They find, oh, this street has a bike lane, this one doesn't, but they're kind of similar characteristics and they compare them. This will be the first time we can really do before and after studies. And then eventually my goal is to be able to, using something like an app, being able to do safest route finding. So you can put in where you're going, where you are and where you're going and what time of day you want to travel, and we can condition your route based on safety, not just on the speed of getting there. So when we get more data, we'll start to work on those kind of questions. And then we were so excited, we got a paper published on this. So we published this in Frontiers in Public Health, so if you're interested in more of the characteristics of the data, it has all the data tables in there if you'd like to use the data. Look there. And then very importantly, I'm not doing any of this work on my own. In fact, most of the people in this picture know more about it than I do. So there's me. This is our colleague Megan Winters. She's a cycling researcher who's now at SFU, so she's been helping us a lot with the context and making sure we're getting our questions right. Taylor he's really the magic behind bike maps. He did all the development and design so far for it. Then Jessica, I presented his work today. He's doing the Strava work, and he will be doing the regional trail studies, part of his master's work. Darren is our newest recruit, and he started his master's, but he did a MyTax internship with CAA, and that's how we are developing the apps. So he's developed both the apps. And then Karen Labrie, she helps us with all of our social outreach and media. So she runs our Twitter site and that kind of thing. So that's the Bike Maps team. And then these are our funders. So most of the funding so far has come from NSERC Engage grants, where we partner with an industrial partner to leverage some money from NSERC, essentially. And so the first one was done by CAA. They were our industrial partner. And then we also are working with Blunt & Associates, which is a transportation engineering research firm, who contacted us to ask how they could use the data. So, wow, I got a deal for you. ACART made our logo for us. And the Traffic Injury Research Foundation, we co-applied for some grants that we're waiting to hear on. That's it. I'm happy to answer any questions and get your advice on what we need to improve.
Yeah, I found this very interesting, but I'm also very interested in the sociology of people involved in accidents. I should report that I'm old enough to have been hit 5 times. My car was messed had several near misses, and also I've had 3 near misses of cyclists while I've been in my car. I think that would be an interesting thing for you to report. Those 3 were all the same. They were cyclists either in a bike lane or on the street, riding on the wrong side and pulling in as I was about to.
Okay,
right
so going against the flow of traffic.
Yeah, so you might try to get drivers to report near misses, because I think if I take that tiny sample of 3, they're all being very stupid at that, and those sorts of riders may be less likely to want to go on
Sure.
and report things.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other is gender. I think that's really important because of the 8 incidents, both near misses and collisions I've had, 8 with women drivers. And they've fallen into 2 categories. One is less now. The earlier ones were highly stressed women rushing home. One of them was not so long ago. She was, I ended up her windshield. She went through a stop sign. She was texting the daycare. That was the next thing in her stressed day. The other one sideswiped me, sent me ricocheting off the side of the panel van. And she stopped and got out and proceeded to have a terrible breakdown. And she explained that she was rushing to pick up the kids at daycare, buy the groceries, and then she had an oppressive husband who expected her to have a hot meal waiting when he got home. So I think that in terms spatial data helps you with infrastructural things, like conditions of road and intersection and things like that. But if you really want to get down to solving the factors that impel drivers to be going too fast or to being, and the other sort of things that I mentioned,
Yeah.
with accidents, you're going to need more data. And there may be ways with these reports where cyclists could mention things they've noticed about the drivers, or their interactions with drivers too.
Yeah, so I think that there's a few different schools of thought, and when we were developing the website, we certainly talked to people who were interested in cyclist education or in these kind of, how do you help people change their behavior. So I think that the way we've set up bike maps, it really is more focused on these ideas around smart by design, around designing cities that are safe for people to ride their bikes from when they're 8 to when they're 80, for all ages and abilities. And the idea behind that is that, so I'm a cyclist, I ride on those regional trails, I'm going down a hill, I know I should stop at the bottom of the hill, but it's so hard to. And it's kind of how do we design infrastructure to overcome people's human nature, to overcome the mistakes that we make so that by design, it's safer. And I think the way we've set up the attributes in bike maps, it's really more to, these are all important questions, but these kind of data are gonna help us understand infrastructure and safe design to hopefully overcome some of these human nature issues. Because I don't think that we can get at the nuances of those kind of individual experiences through a web-based system like that. I think that's going to require more in the field and in hospital surveys, which are really important, and luckily other people are doing some of that work. But eventually, you really hope to bring it all together, I think.
In my case, I've had 3 accidents that had the same correlate, and that was going past the parking lot.
Right.
One driver coming out, one distracted looking if there's a free space, and then another was someone coming off the street in the parking lot, driving on the wrong side.
Mm-hmm.
And so it might be interesting if you're asking people when they've clicked on to start making the report to suggest some of the correlates that might be important for them to mention.
Right, yeah.
Because that one wouldn't have occurred to me initially, but then it seemed to be a consistent thing.
Yeah, some of the police we talked to definitely bring up parking lots as well.
How about whether or not cyclists were wearing helmets?
So we do ask them that.
You do?
Yep.
Okay. And one last thing. Were you aggregating not injured near misses?
We were. Only when we were looking at whether or not there was injury associated with it. So for a lot of the analysis, we separate them, but we wanted to look at, that kind of healthcare implications, and so then for that analysis, we aggregate them.
Yeah, because I've been hit but not injured.
Right.
I've been hit and injured, and I've been hit, and my bike has been badly injured, but I wasn't.
Right. So we do separate those things out in the data that we ask people for.
Okay.
Yep. Anybody else? Yeah.
Do the, I don't know if I saw it on there, but do the intersections that the police and municipalities know about as hotspots, do they correlate with the hotspots that you see in the data for most of the areas? And it's interesting because I was just looking at the Kitchener-Waterloo one very briefly, and I know the highest intersection is Caroline and Herb Street, which is just south of the university here, but I didn't see anything on there. And I know we have a very small sample
Yeah.
size, but for Victoria, has there seemed?
Yeah. For Victoria, we do see that there's good correlation between what people know and what we're finding in the data. So one of the most heartening things was when we put out the 8 worst intersections in Victoria, and what we got back on our blog was, this makes sense. This mirrors my experience. And so they are things that are often known. And I've taken a lot of these results and I've gone to our different municipalities, and they're not surprised, except for perhaps by the intersections between the regional trail and the road network. Those ones weren't always on their radar, but a lot of the other ones, yeah, they do seem to be mirroring. But the nice thing is it's quantitative in a way. Well, it's volunteer data, but it's quantitative in that I can map it out, and rather than just ask myself, okay, Trisalyn, what are the 8 worst spots? And I actually would have picked up some of the ones that we mapped, is that I can back it up with how many people said it was the 8 worst spots and track how it changes over time. So, yeah. There's other questions?
Yeah, mine was actually about the voluntary data
Yeah.
that you're doing. And you touched on it when you said the future research that you're going to be doing, and you're going to be correlating it with the ICBC
Yeah.
data. But I guess I'm really interested in the differences between those,
Yeah.
because since it is voluntary, I'm wondering if like kind of like behavioral, like they might be similar people and things like
Sure.
that. And so you said that the report that you get from ICBC is kind of messy, and so it's going to be hard to figure out. Do you know if anything that within that data though already is the same things you're comparing, so you can see like kind of figure out which ones are the same instances of reporting?
Yeah.
And then go from there and then figure out, okay, these are the same, so why are the people that are reporting here on our website, and then figure out who they are, and then how to touch the other sample population that isn't wanting to go?
That's a super smart way to look at it. So there are going to be instances where, now that we have the very detailed insurance data, we can say, okay, so there was an insurance claim, but somebody also went onto our site and mapped this. And so usually people ask us, what are you going to do when you have duplicates? And your question is, how can you use the duplicates to better understand who's volunteering this information? So I think we will be able to do that, and I think that's an insightful way to look at it.
Because it'd be cool to figure out who isn't too. Like when they talk about Caroline Herbs, like both of us, like we look at each other like, should we put a sign up? Like so I see it when they go by. Like how can we get people to understand and know? I guess that's the outreach coordinator.
That's the outreach, yes. And so I mean, it was great that even just the social media effort of the Geographers Without Borders group was hitting some of those some people that wanted to map locally, which is awesome. But we also find that if you have, like, I think there's Cambridge Hub here, maybe, or because that's the tag that's come up on our social media. But if there's any advocacy groups for cycling safety, they're great to get it out on their listservs, or sometimes there'll be bike clubs or bike stores that have riding groups, and we've also found targeting them. So if you do have any contacts or suggestions like that, we can link them up on our Twitter account, and I'd be delighted. That'd be so great. Yeah.
2 questions. There seems to be kind of 2 strands of how to make cycling safer in the literature that I've seen anyways, and one of them being build better infrastructure, the other one get more cyclists on the road, which is kind of a chicken and the egg. So has there been, like we saw during the peak periods, there's an increase in the number of near misses and crashes. Is that proportional to the number of cyclists that are on the road? So, 10 cyclists with 100 on the road that are actually in an incident, but 10 cyclists with 1,000 on the road during the peak period, 20 with 1,000 on the road. Does that?
So we haven't looked at that closely yet, in part because I don't trust our ridership data, because it's only 1 point and they've only been counting it since December 2014. Yeah. So once we have a year's worth of data, I'll feel like we can match that up a bit better. But you are right that the research shows that the more cyclists you have on the road, the safer it becomes. So the lower the proportion of incidents. So I'm not sure if that works in a 24-hour period, or if that is that the culture shifts and there's more, people are used to cyclists being around. So that would be an interesting question to look at. Yeah.
Question over there.
Yeah.
I was just curious about, so you mentioned Victoria has an active transportation plan, and they have goals set for mode share of cycling. How are they measuring that exactly? Because 4% actually seems really high.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So I guess if you look in the very downtown of Victoria, I've heard it as high as 10% in the core. But the only way that they have right now to measure that is those volunteer bike counts. So they look, and yeah, that's how they measure.
Because I think for our region, the current is under 1%, and they're targeting 1.5%.
Okay.
So.
Yep, that would make sense.
Will it be available as KML files or shape files? And in your info?
So right now we don't. Right now we're not sharing the data, and we're definitely open to that. The goal is eventually to have it so that we can put all the data up on something like Open 311, so anyone can access the data. We haven't quite got that far in terms of the technology. So the advocacy group in Vancouver, they really wanted the data, so we just extracted the data to them. So we're interested in kind of talking to people. We also have a PhD student that's just coming on to analyze all the data for Vancouver. So we don't want to give his data to somebody else, and so there's some sensitivities around that. But eventually, the goal is to have it be open data. The citizens are contributing it. We'd like it to be used for maximum good and available. But if you have a question, send me. I'll give it to you if I can.
When you presented the median reporting day,
Yeah.
like the difference between the when it happened and when they reported, I was wondering, has that changed as the software or the maps have
I don't know.
become more prevalent? Like, are cyclists now, when an instance happens, immediately reporting it?
Yeah.
Because 120 days seems like long.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I don't know. I would guess yes, but I will now look at that because when we first released it, there was obviously a backlog of people with a complaint that they were uploading information. So I think that's a good question. Yeah.
Are you counting collisions that aren't with moving vehicles?
Yes. So you can have a collision with anything. You can have a collision with infrastructure. There's actually a fair number of other bikes, so bike-on-bike collisions. I was just telling my colleagues at lunch that CAA called and asked about wildlife bike interactions, and so we mined the data to see what was there. There are 6 reports of near misses or collisions with wildlife, 5 with deer and 1 with a raccoon. So I think this speaks to the fact that Victoria is an urban deer problem right now.
My own worst collision, which I broke my arm, was bizarre. I was pedaling slowly on King Street in Kitchener, it's Main Street, happened between 2 banks, and they sent, rather than waiting for the Brinks trucks, they sent somebody running with money pouch one to the other, jumped me from the curb.
Oh my.
I broke my arm, they didn't even break stride.
Yeah.
But have you had any interest from anyone to track pedestrian data in the same way? And secondarily, is there any appetite for observing pieces? Or would that create too much overlap? Or would it be a way to?
Yeah. So we have people who email us and say, I saw something, can I report it? And we always say, yes, please do. Just tell us in the comments you're an observer. So we probably need to formalize that because I do think that's actually helpful. And it's easy to tease apart the data by the approximate date, time, and location. You'll be able, we don't have so much data that we can't look at it individually. And then we have had interest on doing something like this for everything. So pedestrians for sure, safe walking to school programs, there's a lot of interest on that. Anti-bullying campaigns, there's been interest on where bullying is occurring. There's been interest on urban deer mapping in Victoria. There's been interest on rescuing people from rip currents globally, and some geomorphologists contacted me about this. And so I think this is a really good set of skills for students to get their hands on. I'm trying to convince Taylor to start a consulting company where he just uses these tools that he's developed and reconfigures them for different purposes because there's so much interest in collecting data that way.
We just tweeted the 2 bike things.
Yay! We'll watch the data roll in.
One methodological question. If you thought of providing an opportunity, rather than just being solely anonymous, if people wished to allow you to contact them, that would be possible.
So we have thought about this. Right now our ethics is set up so it has to be anonymous. So we just haven't been really willing to open the can of worms with the ethics at UVic to try and deal with that so far. But I think there is potential to do that. We have been able to collect people's birth year and month, which is enough that we can match it up with ER records and look at long-term health outcomes eventually. So we have, some things like that. But in terms of follow-up surveys, we haven't really gone that route yet. Yeah.
Have you explored the possibility that the morning spike is somehow related to people being more likely to report at work than after work?
No, we haven't. That is something that we could look at. We think that there's actually more cars on the road in the morning, and that has to do with getting all your kids to school. And so I think, yeah, we have a number of hypotheses to look at, but that, yeah, if they're reporting, because certainly I know I get to work, get my cup of coffee, check out all my Google Analytics, see who's been reporting. And so, yeah, when you arrive at work is a likely time. Yeah, that's a good point. So I'll be here for a while more if you have any more questions, but we're just past our hour, so thank you so much for coming.